Well, thank you very much for joining. This is going to be an interesting topic that you hopefully find exciting, and whichever side of kind of restoration work you're involved in. So to get us going, because we have an exciting program, my first job is to introduce Dr. Melissa Leach, who is the Executive Director of the Cambridge Conservation Initiative, to give us a few words of wisdom and inspiration about this webinar and work.
Okay, great. Well, I'm really delighted to be here, and a very, very warm welcome from CCI to all of you. As Executive Director, where I've actually been for a year to this very day, I'm absolutely delighted to see this happening. CCI is the largest cluster of conservation organisations in the world, working with the University of Cambridge and a fully global network of partners. And both the topic and the style of the work that we'll be discussing in this webinar are absolutely central to what we try to do. So first of all, CCI is all about collaboration, and what we're seeing in the project that's being reported on and talked about here is collaboration between action and knowledge, action, research, evidence and knowledge, between different kinds of knowledge across the natural and the social sciences, but also bringing in local forms of knowledge and ways of knowing, and also between organisations and people. So here amongst the organising team, we've got traffic, we've got the IUCN Sustainable Use and Livelihoods Specialist Group, we have the Endangered Landscapes and Seascapes Programme, and a set of external partners, FairWild Foundation, the Global Biodiversity Standard, and of course all of you and the organisations and relationships that you bring. Secondly, I'm really delighted about this particular webinar today because of the topic. So the ELSP, which is supporting and funding restoration at scale across Europe, has at the heart of its work ideas about restoration being transformative for landscapes, transformative for non-human natures, transformative for people. And this very much links to what now in CCI we're seeing as a core priority on transformative restoration for people and nature in a world of change, a world of changing climate, changing economies, and so on. And in many ways, I think restoration as a broad family of approaches, which is not just about protection, but also about repairing and recovering and rewilding. It's a broad term, and there are different definitions of it. But in many respects, it's kind of the new conservation. I was talking about the importance of collaboration, the importance of transformative restoration, and having people and questions of justice at their heart to be effective, but also to be fair. And I think those are points that are absolutely at the heart of this project and of this webinar. We know that to be sustainable in the long term, landscape restoration needs to benefit people and communities and economies as well as nature. We need new tools to do this well. We need new combinations of knowledge and practice and action. And I think what we have here is a great example of a project with an Advancing Restoration Knowledge Grant, but also in this webinar, a chance to extend the conversation, share the tools, and really inspire some further action, which is going to make use of these in transformative forms into the future. So I will stop there and hand over to the rest of the webinar.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Thank you. This is really, really inspirational and great. So let's take it forward then. So we have an exciting program ahead of us. What we'll do first is we'll hear a little bit about the context of sustainable use of wild species and restoration from Willis Rowe, who is the chair of the IUCN Sustainable Use and Livelihood Specialist Group. And then we'll move over to Amy Woolliffe, who is with Traffic, who is going to present the toolkit that has been launched online last week, but hopefully you'll find it helpful to break it down a bit in terms of elements and how it can be applied. And then very excitingly, we have Vako Devdaradze from Georgia, who has joined us from the field actually, and he'll speak a little bit about the experience of applying the toolkit and the tools, and just the usefulness of them in considering integrating sustainable use of species in landscape restoration work. And then we'll have a little bit of a panel discussion. And for the panel, we have two other additional people. Or three additional people. We have David Bartholomew with the Global Biodiversity Standard, who we'll introduce in a little bit, and Jamal Rowe-Habari with the FairWild Foundation. And finally, we have Nancy Ockendon with the Endangered Landscape and Seascape Program. And I'm going to pass the microphone to Dennis Rowe, who is the chair of IUCN Sustainable Use and Livelihood Specialist Group, to get us going.
Thanks very much, Nastia. And I'm hoping Amy's going to share some slides for me. So yeah, it's great to see so many people thinking that there definitely is a role for sustainable use when we're talking about landscape restoration, because sometimes it can seem a bit counterintuitive. You know, if we're trying to restore a landscape, which presumably is degraded, that's why we're restoring it, then one would assume that, or you might be forgiven for thinking it should be a hands-off approach to actually using the species that are in that landscape, because surely we want as many individuals as we possibly can have in order to ensure that the restoration is successful. So great, we don't have to go right back to basics and talk through why that might not be the case. But I thought it would be useful just to have a quick chat so that we're all on the same page as to what we actually mean when we talk about sustainable use. So if I can have the next slide, please, Amy. So on the left here, underneath the title, What is Sustainable Use?, we see the definition of sustainable use that has been proposed by the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD. And it refers to using species in a way and at a rate that doesn't lead to any long-term decline, and therefore makes sure that those species are still around for future generations to use. So it's very much about sort of the ecological side of sustainability, making sure that species can persist, but also recognizing there's a social element to there, that humans, current and future generations of humans, will want to be able to use those species. We actually have been doing some thinking about sustainable use in the Sustainable Use and Livelihoods Specialist Group and with partners, and actually thinking sustainability actually goes beyond that as well. I mean, conventionally, sustainability is thought of as having three pillars. So the ecological one, the social one, but also an economic pillar, particularly if we're talking about market interventions. They have to be economically sustainable to be viable. So that's also an important thing to think about. But we also recognise, particularly in our post-COVID world, that we also need to think about what are the human health dimensions of using wild species. Some are beneficial for human health, some can be harmful for human health, and the process of actually using species, how they're harvested, how they're processed, and how they're consumed can also have health implications. And related to that, obviously not so relevant when we're talking about plants, but is also the issue of animal health and welfare if the species in use are animal species. We know that there's a big crossover between animal health, human health, and ecosystem health. So this is the concept of One Health, which is strongly linked to sustainable development. And animal welfare can be a predictor of animal health as well. So important to make sure that we're thinking about those kinds of standards in order to maintain animal health, in order to maintain human health and ecosystem health. So next slide, please. So why do we think sustainable use is important? Some recently completed work by the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the Sustainable Use Assessment that was published 2 years ago, highlighted that billions and billions of people across the world rely on the use of wild species every single day. It's a fundamental part of their lives. But particularly for Indigenous peoples and local communities, and for more poorer and marginalised rural groups, sustainable use can be central to their identity and to their very existence. The IPBES assessment also noted that using wild species has huge potential to meet many of the Sustainable Development Goals, but actually that potential is highly overlooked and unrecognised. But overall, sustainable use can be important both for conservation and for people and for development. And this is not just something that IPBES have thought of or that the Sustainable Use and Livelihood Specialist Group have thought of. Different environmental conventions all emphasise the importance of sustainable use. So CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, talks about the fact that sustainable use can make sure that we have an economically competitive and viable land use option which maintains wild species. The Convention on Biological Diversity Addis Ababa principles note that sustainable use is a really important tool for conservation because it provides the incentives for conservation and restoration because of the benefits it generates, which might be financial, but they could also be social and cultural benefits. The Convention on Migratory Species again notes the role of sustainable use in providing those incentives for conservation and restoration, drawing from the Addis Ababa principles. And finally, the IUCN has a policy on sustainable use, which also highlights its importance as a conservation tool because of the human benefits that are derived from using wild species. So it is really important. It's sometimes thought of being something that should be avoided where possible. But I think as long as we make sure we emphasize the sustainability of use rather than just use itself, we can see that this can be a hugely valuable tool in terms of incentivizing conservation and restoration and in providing both those social and ecological benefits from conservation and restoration. So I'll stop there, but hopefully that sort of puts everybody on the same level of understanding as to what we're talking about when we talk about sustainable use in the context of this webinar. So back to you, Nastia. Thank you.
Thanks, Dilys. Fantastic. I think it's really great to have this setting of the topic because it is so essential. We all come from the same place in terms of understanding the very specific guidance and toolkit that we help develop jointly for this project. So let's move on to this, and I'm going to give microphone to Amy Wolof, who is a research analysis support manager at Traffic, and who was a project manager for this initiative. Amy, over to you.
Thank you, Nastia. So I'm going to be sharing today about some of the materials that we've developed. Just to start with saying, like Nastia said, these are now available and online, so please do go and explore them after the webinar. Just to introduce them a little bit, these were produced with wild plants and fungi in mind, mostly. So most of the resources are related to sustainable use of wild plants and fungi. But many of the principles apply to any wild species, so we do really recommend checking them out to see what's relevant to you. They were also designed with sustainable livelihoods in mind. So we intended that they could be used alongside enterprise development for products from wild plants and species. But just as much, they could definitely be used to enable sustainable use of wild species for personal consumption. So again, as I said, do go and explore them and see how you think they could be useful for you. As we've mentioned earlier on the call, we have members of the Global Biodiversity Standard here. So Traffic is a partner to this certification scheme for restoration projects. And we have gone through some feedback rounds of this resource already with hubs of the Global Biodiversity Standard. We've also had a lot of feedback from ELSP grantees, some of whom will be on the call today, so thank you so much. But we still see this very much as version 1, so we're open to more feedback. What we're launching today is the first version of what we think will be improved on in the next year or so. So I will add our details at the end, but just get in touch if you're using this. We want to hear from you, and we are committed to improving it. We've got 2 formats, the first being an online course, and this is really designed for people that want something slightly more interactive and with a few more learning materials. We also have a downloadable PDF toolkit, and the idea behind this was that early feedback suggested some people would prefer something they can just download and use offline, especially if you're working without a good internet connection somewhere. So we've got those two formats for you. In terms of accessibility, there's quite a lot in these. So again, based on initial feedback, we have included a quick access guide in the PDF version. So you can see almost on the first page, you'll find this page here, and you can look at all the resources listed, and you can just click straight on the page number that you're most interested in. And then on our e-learning version, it's really quite easy on the left-hand side to navigate between modules and between resources and explore the materials in that way. So I'm introducing today 3 modules that we've developed as part of this resource. The first being a situational analysis, followed by a species use assessment, and tools to develop a sustainable harvest management plan. So the first module was designed really to help restoration practitioners determine if use of wild species can be not just beneficial to your project goals, but also feasible in the context of your landscape. This picture is actually supplied by Sabuco, and they will be talking later on the call about some of their work in this regard. They've been piloting these materials. But the idea is, for example, have you got a history of use in the landscape that you're restoring, perhaps? Is there species that were used in the past? And alongside ecological restoration, you can also help to bring back those traditions and those use of those species, or even for livelihood purposes. It could be that use is actually a driver of degradation, and in that case, it can benefit your project goals by helping you to reverse that unsustainable harvesting practice and try and make it more sustainable in the future alongside your ecological restoration. There's also factors such as what is your team capacity, what funding is available to you, what skills and knowledge do you have already, what are the community levels of interest in this, and when you consult them, are they keen to be involved in use of wild species? Are they using wild species right now? And are they keen to get involved with enterprise development? So to help with this, we produced some example questions to guide a combination of desk-based research and stakeholder consultations. We've got about 6 elements in what we call this situational analysis. So you're really scanning the landscape and determining if this is something you want to move ahead with. We've also included some examples of the sorts of stakeholders that you might want to involve, particularly stakeholders that are related to use and trade of wild species. And at the end of this module, we have a decision tool, which is designed to help frame your decision-making in this regard. So on the left-hand side, we have each of the aspects of the situational analysis that we'd recommend considering. Some questions at the end, summarise your research. And then on the right-hand side, you'll be able to record the outcome, and it will go green if it was a positive outcome and red if it was a negative outcome. And again, this is really just to frame your thinking. We don't believe this is exhaustive for all landscapes. It's just some pointers to consider. In this example, perhaps there wasn't enough capacity to move ahead, but all the other outcomes looked fairly positive. So in this project, perhaps they'd want to look at whether or not it's something to prioritise in future hiring decisions or funding applications for their site. The second module is a species use assessment, and this is designed to assess wild native species use against various market and species risk criteria. And this one was actually used in a restoration project that was led by Botanic Gardens Conservation International, with partners including ourselves and FairWild. And it was used in the very early stages to carry out a baseline assessment of their landscape to see what species were present, and then to determine which of these species they would want to prioritise for livelihood development in the later phases of their project. So that's one way it could be used to compare across several species in a landscape, but it can also be used to do a more thorough risk assessment of one species and can then be used to inform your management planning. So in terms of species risk factors, things to consider include population trends. If it is present in the site already, is it declining? Is it stable? Is it a threatened species? So is it listed on the IUCN Red List, or is it locally threatened? How does it regenerate? How quickly does it regenerate after harvesting? What part are you collecting? Because if you're collecting, for example, a root, obviously it's destructive to the entire plant. If you're collecting a leaf, that's something that might regenerate more quickly. Market risk factors include things such as competition in the market. Is it a very competitive market to access in terms of sustainable livelihoods? Have you evidenced consumer demand? You don't want to try and create a whole new market for something where there isn't one. what regulations are associated, are there costly permits that are needed to harvest this species, and things such as investment to harvest. So do you need to buy processing equipment? A lot of restoration sites can be in very remote areas. And so if the product is quite perishable, have you got the networks available to get it to where it needs to go to be sold? Or do you need to try and process it somewhat before sale, in which case you might need to buy some slightly expensive processing equipment? We have a tool, and I'm sorry this is a bit small, but you'll see it when you go on the resources. It's an Excel file, but you click on it, and what you can do is enter your species name, the part you're harvesting, the commodity, and then there's a drop-down option for all of these criteria that I've mentioned. So you can choose between a 1, a 2, or a 3 as a score, 1 being a low-risk score and 3 being a high-risk score. And it will give you options, and you can choose the one that suits you best. So for example, this is for the blueberry. I've given it a low-risk score for the plant part collected because it's the fruit. That's given it a 1, and then the same for the market risk criteria. And what that does is automatically generate for you in the next tab a market and species risk rating and score. So if you're comparing between several species, this can be a way to take stock of all species together and work out which ones might be lower risk in terms of sustainable use. You can also look at factors such as community levels of interest and any other benefits in the restoration site. But equally, you could use this to do a very thorough analysis of one species. And in this example, if it's a low species risk, that would indicate perhaps less intensive monitoring of the harvest area. If it was a high species risk rating, that would suggest I need to very carefully monitor the impact of harvest on that population. It's a medium risk rating on the market side, which indicates maybe I need to do a bit more research to look at a sustainable supply chain for this species. To support you with this assessment, initial feedback was that this data can be difficult to find. And while some of it does need to be collected locally, like any inventories of local populations, we have also supplied some databases here that can help you access data on things like reproduction methods, regeneration rates, and known distribution patterns or IUCN Red List assessments for the species. We've also given some guidance on carrying out market research. So just some ideas of the sorts of markets you might want to do some preliminary research with. A lot of the projects that we engaged with are selling products quite locally at the moment. So farmers markets or tourism enterprises that they have on their site, or even their own websites where they're doing direct sales. But we've also listed here some names of international companies that are interested in specifically sourcing from the wild. So we've got some company names you can click on there. We've also got some tips on trade fairs that are specifically for wild species, which can be a great opportunity to connect with those that are interested in sustainable sourcing. The last and third module, and it's probably more designed for more advanced stages of recovery, or at least for planning if you're in the earlier stages, is developing a sustainable harvest management plan. So really, this is to help you understand what are the components of a sustainable harvest management plan and what sorts of information do you need to collect for each one. Again, to make it easier to navigate, we've created a quick guide at the beginning of this resource. So you can see the 10 elements that we recommend considering and including. And these are sourced from FairWild. So FairWild is a certification scheme for wild species. You can easily click onto each component of most interest, and what it will take you to is just a one-page summary with a bit of an overview of what that component's about, recommended elements to include, links to useful resources that can help you with developing this component, and a very brief example from a FairWild management plan for a certified species. We've also linked here, and Dilys mentioned this already, so the International Institute for Environment and Development that Dilys also works with, alongside Traffic and many other international experts, developed a framework for organisations to assess sustainability of use of wild species, with the idea being it can be quite difficult to know what the current sustainability levels are and how to improve it. So this resource is more relevant probably for projects where use has been driving degradation or where use is already occurring. And this can be done at the start of this module to assess current levels of sustainability along these dimensions that Dilys introduced at the start. So again, it's an Excel tool with drop-down options, and you can choose the score that best suits your current situation for things like economic sustainability. So have you got access to markets where there is evidence of stable demand? Social elements, so things like labour rights for your workers, ecological elements, so this is always going to be relevant to a restoration project. Is there monitoring of the resource? Is there evidence that harvest is impacting upon the population? And human health, as Dilys mentioned, things like are people adequately trained? Have they got the right equipment to harvest? And have we looked at contamination risks? Because again, in restoration projects, I know there's often a problem with contamination in these areas. So when you see your results after entering all your information, this can help you to focus on the element of sustainability that you need to do the most work on. In this example, it looks like ecological is the weak side at the moment. So you can go back to the resource guide and you can look at the elements that are related to ecological sustainability and focus on those at the beginning. So things like gathering data for sustainable collection and developing a plan, formulating harvesting guidelines to make sure that it's being harvested in a way that will not damage the population in the long term. So we know it's a lot of information, but we hope something like that can make it a bit easier at the beginning if it is relevant to zone in on the bit of most interest. As I mentioned at the very start, we also would intend that for most people, you might be using this alongside enterprise development. And so what we've done is add a supporting resource here, which includes loads and loads of online materials and tools that are specifically geared towards enterprise development for wild plant and fungi. So there's some really nice case studies of innovation in how these things are being marketed or where they're being sold, and so on. So that's the resources finished there. And like I said, please go and explore them. But I'm just going to finish with some case studies because others have mentioned already that at the very start, we really weren't sure how many case studies we would find of restoration projects that are using sustainable use to enhance their goals. We knew of some that we'd worked in already, but we were happy to find several more case studies, and they're all linked on the website. But just to get you thinking at the end of this call about whether or not this could be relevant to you, I'm just going to share some of the ways in which it's already supporting these projects. Thank you as well to everyone that supplied these. I'm pretty sure I've seen these people on the call today, so thanks to everyone that helped. This is an example from Spain. So Rewilding Spain, alongside the ecological goals of their project, they also have the goal of trying to reverse rural abandonment, or at least to support improved socioeconomic opportunities in their landscape. Because lots of people have left this landscape, there's economic stagnation. So they've really focused on economic sustainability by supporting a tradition of resin tapping. So they have many pine trees in the intact areas of their landscapes, and they're supporting pine tree resin tappers with training opportunities to try and improve the efficiency of the harvest, and also new ideas for access to other markets, because profit margins can be quite low for this commodity. I think I've seen Cairngorms Connect as well on the call. So this isn't a wild plant or fungi, but it has got transferable ideas to other projects, and it's an amazing example. So in their landscape, they have artificially high numbers of deer, and they have to cull them as part of their ecological strategy to enable regeneration in their landscape. But rather than let that go to waste, one of their other goals is to support local livelihoods. So they employ deer stalkers to do the culling, but then they also support the rural economy of game dealers by allowing onward sale and processing by these game dealers in the area. But they also have some direct sales to butchers and restaurants and so on. And what they found is the butcher, for example, can get a higher profit by selling the branded venison from the restoration site. And it's also just a really nice way to raise awareness of their project amongst local communities. In Romania, Foundation Conservation Carpathia have done amazing work where in their landscape, commercial logging is contributing to environmental degradation. So one of their key focuses is to support the development of other livelihoods in their area. So they've done a lot of work on enterprise development, and one of them is a wild food hub. It's quite simple, but really it's wild foods that can be processed in things like jams, honeys, and so on. And then they've supported the local producers with sales avenues and business support. So What they've done is got their own website with the branded products being sold directly. They've also got a tourism enterprise in their landscape, and they actually supply the tourism enterprises with some of this food. And they've made links with a national supermarket, and they're selling it via the supermarket as well. The last one is quite a nice example because this is very small scale, and I think Sally might also be on the call. So this is Dr. Sally Goldstone, and she is a botanist. She lives in Scotland, and she had the idea of trying to restore areas around Scotland that have been exhausted by farming, so exhausted arable land around Edinburgh. And she planted the wildflower meadows primarily to restore ecological functioning in these landscapes. But in the first year, she also applied the principles of our species use assessment before we developed it, but in her own way. And so she looked at which of the species were most abundant in the landscape, which ones showed resilience to wild harvest, and then from that created new product ideas from them. So she's made her own skincare company called SULi Botanicals. You can buy the products directly there, but she's also got stock in various outlets. And she's also using the profits from the sale of these to fund further restoration efforts and convert more of that land into wildflower meadows. So like I said, in terms of next steps, we're really welcoming further piloting and feedback. I'll add my contact details at the end alongside our traffic website. Do let us know if you have a case study we can add, because we're really keen to get more case studies as well. And this will be a mentoring resource for those that are engaging in the Global Biodiversity Standard, and David maybe can talk about this later. They can benefit from mentoring, and it will be used and piloted further as that over the next year. So thank you so much for listening. As I mentioned, these are contact details if you want to get in touch and give us any feedback or know more. And this was, again, thank you to the donors. This was carried out in collaboration with the Global Biodiversity Standard, which is funded by the UK government through the Darwin Initiative. And of course, thank you so much to the Endangered Landscapes and Seascapes programme for funding this project. And you can find out more about ELSP here. So I'm going to end there, and I think we're going to hand over to Vako now for some feedback on some of our tools.
Hi, Vako. And hi, Alex. I can see there are two representatives from Sabuco, from Georgia. Very warm welcome. So maybe in just a few minutes, having heard from Amy about the theory and the tool that is now online, and I think everybody have access to the link. Can you tell us a little bit about the landscape you're working in, and also why sustainable use of wild species is important, and what you've been doing so far with this guidance?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation, Amy, for including me and our organization in your agenda, as well as for your support over these past months. I have the honor of serving as a manager of the Raja project. Officially, title is Raja Livelihoods, Enhancing Landscape Connectivity and Resilience. This initiative has been running for almost 2 years from the support of Endangered Landscape and Seascape program. Our work focuses on the Raja and Livelihoods. This is ecologically important area where the Greater and Lesser Caucasus meet together. And this unique corridor covering over 150,000 hectares, including several emerald sites, national park, and managed reserve. The landscape is incredibly rich in biodiversity, but also we face serious environmental threats like unsustainable logging, poaching, and climate change, also mining. Forests are being degraded because of logging, highland pastures are shrinking, and wildlife populations, especially ungulates, have declined dramatically in the last decades. As a project manager, I'm involved in planning and implementing our efforts to address these challenges. We are building alliances among stakeholders, assessing the ecological baseline, and preparing a large-scale restoration plan from the support of ELSP. A key part of our work is making sure that restoration supports not only nature but local communities. I think this was the point where our collaboration has potential and to gain more trust in local communities. In my opinion, sustainable use of wild species is an essential part for making restoration efforts more real and long-lasting for nature and for the people who are connected to the landscape. I will try to answer from the perspective of the people who are living in our project territory. Local communities rely on using wild plants for food, medicine, and sometimes it's their income also. So, integrating their sustainable use into restoration helps to build practical links between conservation goals and their everyday life, which I can say that is not easy in our case. According to the recent data, this region where we are working is economically weakest in the country. And if we want to maintain biodiversity and also support people who live in the landscape, we should help them to make ecosystems affordable for them, but from different sides. In my opinion, it can help to reduce pressure on ecosystem also, for example, even decreasing human wildlife conflict, which is in a really high level in Raja. Also illegal poaching by offering alternative sources of income from the same ecosystem they are living. And I think that it can help to restore balance between these people and landscape. That's my opinion.
Thank you so much, Vako. This is incredible, and thank you for being here. And I think you've hit a nail on the head here about the longevity of the restoration projects from and the success of ecological interventions that have people kind of consideration and perspectives in the middle of it. And I think this is exactly what the topic is about. So it's so great to have you and your perspectives. What I'm thinking now, because we are, of course, going to finish on time, so we're gonna maybe open the panel now. And all it would take actually is introducing two additional people on this call. So two people I'd like to introduce, in addition to those who already met and who spoke, is David Bartholomew, who is the Global Biodiversity Standard Project Manager with Botanic Gardens Conservation International. And the second person is Jamal Rowi Habari, who is the Business Development and Project Associate with the FairWild Foundation. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and while I'm also looking at the chat and questions appearing there, so maybe I'm going to just go to David, who didn't have a chance to speak yet, and ask you to maybe briefly introduce the Global Biodiversity Standard and how it relates to this topic, and how do you think this guidance could further support the goals of the GBS? Thank you.
Great, thanks for the introduction. So the Global Biodiversity Standard is a new initiative that we launched just last year. It's a certification program for restoration projects that verifies biodiversity uplift. So we've developed a methodology that assesses projects against 8 criteria, measuring everything from, are you using the right species? Are you recovering the right ecosystem? Protecting biodiversity that exists, as well as other things such as avoiding the use of invasive species and including good adaptive management practices there as well. Alongside that, we've also been developing a mentoring program, which is to help practitioners to align better with the standard and to really deliver those positive outcomes for biodiversity. And as Amy introduced earlier, this is going to be one of those important resources for that mentoring program, for practitioners to think about how they might use sustainable use to not only deliver better outcomes for biodiversity, but also for the people and local communities working in that area. And I think it's really important that we're starting to think about sustainable use, because often we see that the economy for the local communities can often be a a challenge to deliver effective restoration that can deliver for biodiversity. We might see that there's the need to harvest resources from the environment, and sometimes that can be unsustainable. And we see overutilization as often one of the threats that can hinder the return of native biodiversity. So the fact that we can have this new resource to train people how to do this sustainably can really help to recover that biodiversity. And also, as well as that, means that they don't necessarily always need to resort to non-native species as well, which can also be counterproductive for biodiversity in restoration projects.
Super, thanks a lot, David. And I think it's also is a really interesting opportunity of synergies. So ELSP program has been focused primarily on the European landscapes and seascapes. I think we found over this project period that it's such an incredible opportunity to connect to the also global efforts and other initiatives through the same topic of integrating sustainable use and people into the restoration work. So thanks a lot for this partnership. I have another quick question, and then I'm going to pay attention also to the Q&A. But I wanted to ask a question to Jamal, who also didn't have a chance to introduce himself yet. With a lot of people on this, especially with a lot of people on this call who probably are restoration practitioners, conservation practitioners, I think what we've heard that one of the challenges is really about kind of understanding kind of how supply chains work. Where do you start? You know, what is there a market for these things? You know, if you produce something locally. So I wanted to ask you, maybe introduce yourself and FairWild Foundation very briefly, but also what are the opportunities in the marketplace for sustainable use of wild species from your perspective? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Nastya. Yes, so FairWild helps companies which use wild plant and fungi ingredients in their products to make sure that their operations are benefiting rather than exploiting the communities and the landscapes that they're sourcing from. So that can mean our certification scheme, which is quite comprehensive, looks at social sustainability and ecological sustainability, but it can also mean more sort of tailor-made solutions for private companies. And to answer your question, yeah, I think that people are often surprised by just how much all of these wild plants and fungi are already used in the products that we use every day, and how valuable some of them are. And that means that for some species, the demand is so high that the real challenge is actually not promoting them. It's trying to make the already very high levels of extraction more sustainable by promoting improved harvesting techniques and things like that. But for others, you know, the market might need some encouragement first. A good example is argan oil, which is now sort of ubiquitous in personal care products in the Western world, but until really quite recently was really only used by indigenous communities in parts of Western Morocco. And this explosion of use has benefited, you know, those local communities. It's benefited consumers because they have access to this great ingredient. And it's also stopped those landscapes from being converted into pasture and to things like that. And I think there are so many species out there that have the potential to be these sort of hugely economically valuable products and ingredients that just need some promotion. And I suppose that means that what's really important is that when we're working on the ground as restoration practitioners, it's important to listen to local communities when they talk about species that you might not have heard of, that they have use for, and just think, you know, is there a way that maybe we could help them commercialize this, and you know, that will benefit that community, also benefit the landscape you're working in. So yeah, I think there are loads of opportunities out there, but we just need to look for them, I suppose. Yeah.
I so agree with you, and thank you so much. And I think this partnership and the way the resources came together in particular was so interesting, because we had this very different sets of expertise and experiences coming from both conservation, wildlife trade perspective, sustainable use perspective, but also this market and reality check on this sustainable supply chain work. There is Vako, I don't know if you see the question in the to you in the Q&A. I might, in the interest of time, I might just read it quickly. But I think a really fascination with your work and your presence and working in the region. And I think Susanna is asking, how have you managed to carry out your work in rural areas like Racha? Are people open to your presence? So give us reality check on what it takes to deliver conservation work in Georgia.
Yes, of course. I will answer to Susanna's question. 1 minute. Firstly, it's not easy for us to work in Raja because of the reasons I have mentioned above, but we really tried to find some solutions to talk to the people. And firstly, I want to express my thanks to Traffic, especially Emmy, who is helping us from the first stage to identify the floristic diversity of Racha, and we are scheduling next meetings in a few days. And I appreciate your work, because people got interested more and more after we talked about the topics. We used the traffic toolkit as a key part of our early planning process in Racha. It helped us to explore how wild plant use could fit into our restoration goals, especially in a region where building trust with local communities is critical for us. And the toolkits are really useful because it guided us through assessing which species are already known for people, culturally valued or traded, like it was about sweet chestnut, wild rose, cumin, and other. And we found with now for 10 people way to speak to these topics. And with their interest, we are trying to further our relationships and to get their trust. And I think that these toolkits are not only for wild plants, because we used a lot from stakeholder communication module for this, and we tried everything to talk to these people. In some villages and some parts, Raja is really diverse. It's tiny territory, and our project territory does not cover all of this historical region of Georgia, Raja. But sometimes there are some villages with whom we have great relationships, but there are some kind of villages near protected area that they are very skeptical to protected areas, because this protected area created about 2 years ago, and it had a lot of problems, to be honest. And these people are skeptical of all conservative efforts. But thanks to this idea, and we are trying to find every solution, but it was really great, because we had 10 people who we spoke, and they are now ready. And from these 10 people, 6 are ready to have more information about fungi and wild plants, how to use these, how to have access to new channels and markets. And I think our relationships is getting better and better, but it's not easy like in Western European countries. I know that there are also problems, but we have a lot of problems with people because they are very skeptical to conservation and restoration. But step by step, we are trying to have more trust from them. And thank you for this and these toolkits also, because we tried to had like interviews and other steps. So we will try to continue our work, and when we have findings, we can share our experience and findings. And I think I have answered the question. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Waka. Thank you. And I can see, and thanks a lot for for everyone for being so patient with Q&A function instead of chat. But there are more words of support from including from Javier from Rewilding Spain about the usefulness of the tool, which is really, really good to hear. Thanks so much. So we are slightly over time, and we'll finish within the next few minutes. But to start the wrap up, I first wanted to ask Nancy Ockenden, who is the science manager with Endangered Landscapes and Seascapes program, to maybe give us give us few remarks about the future as well, and how, you know, whether it's useful for the program. Thanks, Nancy.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nastya, and thanks to you and Amy and all the rest of the speakers and your collaborators on producing such a fantastic set of tools and outputs, and also giving us a great webinar today. It's really clear from the number of participants and the number of questions that this is a really important topic, and there's real interest in learning more about how to work in this area. The Endangered Landscape and Seascapes programme supports landscape and seascape restoration projects around Europe, as you said, and has already been mentioned in this webinar. It's so important that we're working with the people that are living and working in these landscapes, that they're being involved in the ecosystem restoration, and that they're seeing some of the benefits that come from a restored landscape, from restoring biodiversity. There are benefits flowing to people and communities as part of this. And I think often our projects start with the ecology and the biodiversity, and tools like yours that really show them the other opportunities that are available to bring people with them, and kind of really work with communities right from the start, are going to make a huge difference. And I think we've all learned a lot through this project. It's been great to work with you on that. And I think I'll just finish by encouraging everybody to check out the platform, follow the links that have been shared, and see what can be done.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you. I think one comment I wanted to make is it's an evolving tool. We really want it to be useful for you, for your projects, whether you're developing, designing, you're thinking about restoration project, you want to integrate it, you know, sustainable use into it. You're curious about what maybe is missing in your project now, and whether this could bring important buy-in from people and long-term socioeconomic benefits. We also want to make sure, if you do design projects, that they're really underpinned by this strong definition of sustainability. You know, we call this very carefully, this guidance, focusing on sustainable use rather than just use of resources. And I think, you know, echoing what Dilis's introduction in the beginning, you know, we want to challenge the definition of how we think about sustainable use and how we can bring in this elements of social, economic, health perspectives, because this would make a system more sustainable. And then finally, maybe to say, there is, you know, we think there are so many opportunities, and we'd love to stay in touch. So we'll send a follow-up message, but also set of presentation slides. Please get in touch if you're developing projects and you want some advice, you want a really helpful partner maybe to collaborate on restoration work. We'd love to contribute to that. But also, we think there are so many opportunities with restoration agenda being so high on the agenda, with all the global processes and European processes. So we think this perspective of how much, you know, people's benefits in restored landscapes, in the restoration play is so important. So please get in touch. I would like to thank hugely Endangered Landscape and Seascape Program and CCI and Arcadia for this incredible funding. We've first had this idea of doing something around sustainable use and restoration. I know David Thomas is somewhere listening, probably about, I don't know, I mean, maybe nearly 10 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. And I think it's been fantastic for us to be able to innovate with partners and actually test it out. So amazing to have this product, amazing also to evolve it. We're very grateful to the Global Biodiversity Standard and being able to kind of almost immediately continue the evolution alongside the hubs. So stay in touch. Big thanks to everyone, ELSP team, all of you are incredible, and the grantees are incredible as well. Have a great restoration. Is that too cheesy to say? I don't know.